Hello friends, and welcome to my channel, Stamp and Create with Beth. I'm Beth Roy, an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and today I'm going to make a Christmas card with you. I pulled out a retired set, Country Living, and I absolutely love the truck stamp in this set. And so I've had it, it's been retired a while. I've had it since it came out, and I've used it a ton. So if you have this set, grab it out and use this truck image. And I'm going to pair that with a brand new set that comes available July 1st called the Christmas Barn. It does have a bundle with coordinating dies, and I'm going to be using the greetings in this set, the wreath, and this tree for the inside of my card. I colored my original with our watercolor pencils. We have two sets of watercolor pencils, so I just have mine in a container together, and we're going to use those. And I've also used the Perfectly Penciled Designer Series paper, and I'm going to show you how I altered that paper right here. And I love this color scheme. Red and teals are a great color combo, and I love doing that for Christmas. I'm also going to show you a little technique with your white craft ink and a water painter. I do have an older one that I use for this technique, but you could use one of the new ones. Just make sure you clean it well. And you can also use a paintbrush if you do not have water painters, and a little tiny cup of water. So let me move this off to the side so I don't stick my hand in it. And we're going to get to stamping. So I'm going to stamp my truck first and color it. That takes the most time. And I will give you all the measurements for each piece as we go along. I have done a die cut, but you can cut just a rectangle with your trimmer. So this can be a simple card. The wreath I have already die cut with the new dies that go with the Christmas Barn. But you could also just simply cut around it if you don't have a cut and emboss machine, or leave it off. I just wanted to make it a little more wintry and add the wreath for the holiday. So on the inside, I just did a little bit of simple stamping on a basic white piece, and we'll do that while we're waiting on this white ink to dry. So let's get stamping. First, I have a Cherry Cobbler base. It is 5.5 by 8.5, and I have it scored at 4 1/4. Then I have my stitched rectangle here. If you do not have a cut and emboss or the stitched rectangles, you could replace that with any die that you want that will fit the truck stamp. You can also just cut a rectangle to 4 inches by 2 5/8 or 2 3/4, whatever size you like. I'm just grabbing my truck. Now I want to say, this is one of our old clear mount stamps. So if you have this stamp, you may find that it does not stick well to your block. You can buy, let's see, I think I have a pack here somewhere. It's called Cling Adhesive. We sell it in our adhesive section, and you can convert this so that it has the stickier tape on it, so it holds on to the block better. So I'm just going to pick that stamp up with my clear block, and I am using basic gray classic ink, and I'm going to color with my watercolor pencils. However, I'm not adding water to my coloring. I'm just leaving it as the pencil. You certainly could watercolor this if you wanted to. With the pencils, you just use that water painter and you go over this pencil, and it smooths out and looks like you painted it. If you do that, you will want to use the black StazOn ink or the saddle brown StazOn ink when you add water. I do tempt fate many times and go ahead and stamp with my classic gray ink, and then add use a very let's see, it can be barely wet. That's what the word I'm looking for, barely wet. So it's just damp, not a lot of water, and attempt to watercolor and not smear. But the classic ink will smear because it is water-based. So just be careful of that if you're doing that. Or you could try a no-line watercolor with this as well, which just means you stamp it very light and then you're going over those lines anyway, so you don't care that it smears. I'm just going to stamp my truck about the middle of my rectangle here. So I inked it up. I like to sometimes lay my stamp upside down and apply the ink. I'm not sure if that was on camera. I wasn't paying attention. When I have a larger stamp, because I can see that I'm inking it well, and I'm not trying to fit it all onto the ink pad. Have a little more control there. So I just want to make sure I get a good impression. You could also use your Stamparatus here, which I will be bringing mine in and using it when I do my words. I love the Stamparatus for stamping words and when you want to make sure your image is just where you need it. And you can also position your stamps, and then as you're stamping multiple stamps, you already have it set up and it's much quicker and easier. Sorry about shaking the camera there. I'm just using a chamois. I cut mine in half so I can hold it, and I'm using that to just wipe the ink off my stamp. So the chamois just use water. It comes wet, and when you open it, it comes in a pack. I have mine stored in a clear mount stamp case just so that I don't get it on my projects. I have ruined things by accidentally laying it near, so I try to keep them in a stamp case. And I also use that to clean my stamps on my Stamparatus. Okay, so we're going to get to coloring. I did spend quite a bit of time on this image. I love coloring, and I like to just sit and color as I'm watching TV or hanging out with my son when he's doing other things, but he wants mommy near. So I like to color a lot. This is my me time, my time to relax. So I'm going to try to color this a lot quicker than I would if I was just leisurely coloring. So I used basic black, Coastal Cabana, and on your pencils, you'll notice that this is not truly the color that's on the end. It colors a lot lighter. This is Bermuda Bay, and see, this looks lighter, but it's actually darker. So they look a lot different when you color and then you add water, or if you just color and don't use water. So just play with them and see which colors you like and how they work. And I'm also using basic gray, and you'll see this one's shorter because I use this one a ton. So I'm going to use the basic gray to kind of put in some shadows, and I'm also using the black for that. And so I'm going to show you how I kind of add those in when I don't have 3 colors I want to use. So you usually have a light and a dark and something in the middle. So I'm going to use my gray and my black to help me darken my colors. And I also colored the wreath, and I will tell you those colors when we get to it. So I'm going to work on this truck, and there's no right or wrong way. I'm actually going to put some Bermuda Bay down where I want darker. So as you can see, I'm just kind of throwing it on. I like to do circles. You can do crosshatch. You can do any way that you want to apply this color. So I'm just trying to throw it on there kind of quick. And you can start off light and then add more to it and press harder. So if you're not used to coloring with these, you want to start really light. Hopefully you can see that. So your pressure changes how much of the pencil goes on. So you can start off really light, or if you know how dark you want it, you can go in a little darker. Since I've already colored my truck once, I kind of know how I want it, but I do adjust it. So you can start off light and then just keep building your color. And like I said, there's no right or wrong. Color it how you like it. And then add in some darker. And even though the wreath ends up covering this up, I still took my time and colored all the parts of the truck how I wanted it. You could leave the wreath off of it. It's completely up to you. So the Bermuda Bay is the darker color. And you're just trying to lay down lines, and then we're going to come in with that Coastal Cabana and go over top of all of it. So you're even going to go over top of where you colored that Bermuda Bay. You don't have to, but I like to kind of blend them together. And that's why I said it takes a little time sometimes to keep adding that color and building it up and see how you like it. Because you want to leave some where there's just the Coastal Cabana because it's a highlight. So you don't always want to have areas that are mixed. And we're going to come back in with the basic gray and that Bermuda Bay and add even darker spots. Like I said, I color in all different directions. I do circles. I do lines. So I just like the color. So I just practice different things. As somebody who's just an amateur here, I do just like to play. So don't think if you're not doing it my way, it's wrong, because I just like to color and relax and enjoy the process. So, Stampin' Up told us yesterday that, I think it was yesterday or a couple days ago, that July is the month of watercoloring. So, I love our watercolor pencils. I really wish we had more colors that coordinated with our line, but you can really do a lot with the 23 colors we have. And of course, they coordinate with our inks and our other products. So you can see there's quite a difference here as I'm layering this color. So I've only put 2 colors on. And like I said, I love a good teal. I love those old trucks that are teal. And so I'm just going to continue to kind of build that color. See how there's a little highlight here? I'm going to come back in with that Bermuda Bay. And like I said, when you're looking at your pencils, try not to get confused by this, because this is Coastal Cabana and this is Bermuda Bay. They look a little opposite of what it really looks like. And I'm just going to press a little harder this time when I'm adding in that Bermuda Bay, and I'm kind of doing circles. I want this to blend. I love the look of the pencil and the fact that it looks kind of rough. I like that texture. But I do want to make sure that I don't cover everything because I do want some light spots in there. And I am going to continue to build up the Coastal Cabana too. So we're gonna just keep adding color. Like I said, I don't know if I do it the right way, but this is the way I'm doing it. So if you're maybe a trained artist, you will probably have some other tricks up your sleeve, but this is how I just keep building the color. It's all about the pressure that you're putting on your pencil. Don't be afraid to turn your stamped image and really get into those spaces and where you want it to be dark. And some of this may get covered up because I am going to add some white ink here and there. So, and I might not color this exactly the same. I think I went this direction on this one. So I'm just building up that color. And sometimes, like I said, I take my time. So don't feel like you have to rush. Enjoy this process of coloring and kind of experimenting with where you want that color to go. Now I'm going to come back with the Coastal Cabana. And I'm not going to color over everywhere I put the Coastal Cabana. I just want to add some spots. Make some spots darker. Because I want some of the highlights to stay. And I go the other direction just to try to help smooth it out a little bit. So there's my truck. Now on my original, I took lots of time doing circles and going over and over again to help get this texture and kind of smooth that out. So like I said, I do circles. You can do lines and go different directions so that the colors look a little different and they kind of blend together. And then now I'm using a softer hand or touch, and I'm just kind of going back in. So it does look a little different. I did that one a little bit darker. I feel like no matter how many times I color, I can never do things identical. So to create a little bit more shadow, you can come in with your gray pencil and just go along where you want that shadow to be. So you can really do that now. And then you can go back over top of it with your Coastal Cabana. If you don't want that to stay gray, So you're going to add in where you want that shadow. I almost need to sharpen my pencils. I've been coloring so much. You're going to come back over top of it. Now this is the Bermuda Bay, because I want that to stay Bermuda Bay, but it adds a shadow. So you can see that. It adds the shadow in, and then I put my original color back over top. Gray helps change the tone of your colors. So that's why I like using it. Now I'm gonna start on my tires, and I'm just lightly adding basic gray. So I'm using a real gentle touch. I'm barely putting any pressure there. And even though I think the wreath covered this one up, again, you might not want that wreath on there, so I like to just color all the parts. Sometimes I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to use my image. And we're going to cover up this grass. Even though in the snow, grass can be showing through, I am going to add some white ink to that. So I've colored a really light layer there. Now I'm going to come back in with a harder, I'm going to press harder and add in so that the gray is a little darker. And we will even add in some black. So obviously there's going to be different tones here on the tire. Oops. And I'm just doing circles. I'm doing lines. So whatever texture you like. And then the bumper is going to have some gray. Got my lights here. And then our handle. Let me come back in with this Coastal Cabana right here. I missed a little spot here. Now with the black, I'm going to just add in a little bit of darkness where I want it to be really dark. And you can also use this black to add in shadows. So that really helps. It helps accentuate that piece right there because you know it is sticking out and it will create shadows. Come back in with my basic gray, and I'm just adding a little and continue to work my color until I like it. I'm going to add some gray here. And then I'm just using a light hand and coloring in a little gray onto the wood. And then go back in and add some darker spots, whatever you like. Did that one a little bit darker than the other. So as you can see, our truck is really developing the color as we layer and layer and you add in those shadows. So if there's anything that you want to adjust it. I'm just going over it with Coastal Cabana one more time with a really light hand. And I'm kind of using different direction than I did the first time I laid the color. Just to help blend those strokes. And then for my windows, I'm just using a really light hand. That's actually a little bit darker than I did, but that's okay. You could always smear it out with a paintbrush that's just barely damp, or your water painters. Now to do this background, I literally just did little lines. So I started here and try to go very, very, very light. Very light. I'm actually using a little more pressure than I did. And I built that color. So I'm doing lines in one direction. Like I said, I start off very light. This probably has 4 or 5 layers on the finished card. And this is Coastal Cabana. It's the exact same color. And how we're controlling the color is just our pressure. So you can take your time. I'm rushing this one a little bit. Take your time and do little strokes. This is actually getting a little darker than my original. That's okay. And then I'm just going to go this direction. Kind of like cross-hatching. So, well, it is cross-hatching, I think is the proper term in the art world. So the first, on this card, I did a really light layer. Wasn't sure exactly how I wanted that to look or what shape I wanted that to take. And then I just kept adding in more lines in the areas I wanted it darker or to go further away from the truck. And I like that look because it just kind of doesn't have a real defined edge, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So depending on how you want that to look, then you can come back in. And I'm using shorter strokes and I'm just adding in a little bit of darker color. And the pressure that you put on it is going to determine how dark that color gets. Oops. And as you build it. So you can, hopefully you can see on this one, I did a very, very, very light hand and then just added in. And this one's a little darker because I had, I did it quicker and I didn't take my time and make sure that I was going light. So I'm just gonna cross hatch this the other way or put down lines. There we go. So you can do that, like I said. This one, I didn't go as far out. This one, I went a little further. You can adjust that how you want. And then you can also add in shadows to that if you want. Okay, I'm going to call it quits on that. You can overwork and overwork and overwork. I'm going, before I color my wreath, because I do want this to dry and I put quite a bit, I'm going to do the technique with the white ink. So I have my craft ink refill here. I have a block that I've squirted my craft ink on, and I have an old water painter. You can use a new one if you don't have the old version. They're just a little bit different. The handle's different. But this has water in the tube. You can fill it with water. And I just squirted some of this onto my block, and then you can do a drop of water and loosen that ink. And I have a paper towel here because I like to pull off once I've mixed it. If it's too loose or you have too much water, you can squirt a little bit more craft ink down in there. Now, I'm going to grab a scrap sheet because I want to keep this surface clean. Craft ink takes a lot longer to dry than our classic inks or the Memento or StazOn. This is very thick ink, so I'm just going to, my tip is wet, I'm just picking up that ink and I'm going over top here. And like I said, some of this is going to get covered up. That's okay, because you may decide you don't want something on your card. So I like to go ahead and do this layer exactly as I'd want it to look if there was nothing over top of it. And I'm just adding snow. So make sure everything's colored how you like before you start this process, because I'm actually going to add a little snow to the truck, and I'm not going to be able to adjust the colors. So this takes a little bit to dry. I do have my heat tool here next to me, so I can speed up that drying process. I normally would color these, put the white ink on, go do something else, and then come back. I like to do my cards in a process, in a batch, and just leave them and then come back. But if you're trying to get these done quick, you could color them all, do all the white, and then by the time you get done, hopefully with your last card, the other cards will be dry enough to work with. Oops. So hopefully you can see that shiny part. So I'm just adding that craft ink in. And I thinned it out just a little bit so that it would spread better, but you can leave it as thick as you want. If you thin it out a lot, you may have to do more than one layer. And I'm also going to show you, I didn't do it on this card, but I'm going to show you a splatter technique that I love using this ink for. But you definitely need to protect your surface because it will get everywhere. Now I'm going to add in a little bit of snow onto my truck. So I just want to add a little bit here. And I'm going to add a little bit here. And I'm just tapping down onto my paper. I don't want it to be too uniform. It is snow. I'm going to add a little up here on the hood. Now I am going to say you need to be careful. And I do tend to leave it a little thicker. See the blue that came off, the teal? When you add this white ink in with your water painter, if you touch anywhere that you've colored, it's going to activate your watercolor pencil because that's what it's supposed to do. So you'll see I have just a tad here where it pulled off this ink. So take your time and clean your brush. And I may need to get it a little thicker. add just a little bit more. I want it a little thicker for this snow. And a lot of times I leave this block just filled with white ink, especially when I start my Christmas cards. Because I like to splatter the white ink and use the white ink quite a bit. But I want to be careful that I'm not activating my color and smearing it too much. So I'm just going in gently. And adding a layer of snow. Now on this truck, my ink was too thin and the snow didn't show up down here as well. That's okay. It didn't hurt anything. We're going to put a little bit down here. And as this dries, you can go back and add right on top if it didn't get as white as you wanted it. You can add it right in again. Like I said, if it's a little too thin, then it might just soak in. You'll see as this is drying down here, the gray is coming back through. If you don't want that and you want it more white, you can just come back in and add another layer. Just be careful not to over wet your basic white. This is basic white. I guess I'm not sure I told you that. I used basic white cardstock. You could use watercolor paper, but if you're not going to activate your pencil, watercolor paper is a lot more expensive than the basic white, so I tend to just use the basic white. So you can see it's pretty wet because I have quite a few layers. To clean this, all you have to do is squirt a little bit of water so it runs through, and then you wipe off the white ink. It may take a little bit more than the classic inks to get it clean, but just keep doing it until your brush is clean. And you can also clean it under the sink with some soap and water if you've let it sit. So we're going to color our wreath next, and our wreath has a little bit of white on it, but it's not as prominent because it activated my pencil that I put down. So we're going to lay this to the side and let it dry. And then when we get ready to assemble our card, anything that's still wet, I'm going to hit with my heat tool. Okay, so for the wreath, I used, again, I used both sets of pencils. I used Cherry Cobbler and Real Red and Greeny Apple Green and Garden Green. No, I need these back out. I'm going to show you how I altered my paper. Now my little wreath here, it's just a little die cut. Again, if you have a wreath from a previous set, we've had lots of little wreaths. If you have a retired one, just use what you have. If you don't have a cut and emboss machine, you can just fussy cut around it. So I'm going to just do this really quick. I didn't do anything special here. I just colored it with the Greeny Apple Green. And then I added in, not everywhere, but randomly, the Garden Green. So that we just have two colors on there. And I'm just doing circles here and there so that they both are on there. So And then my bow, I added in a highlight where these lines were. This is with the real red. And when you watercolor with the real red, it is more of, in my opinion, a poppy parade. It is not a true red. It's more of a pink, has more pink to it. So just know that if you're adding water to this. The Cherry Cobbler is the darker red, and I'm just going around that highlight. As best I can. For some reason that went right over it. So I'm trying to leave that real red right in the middle. So I put it down first so I had kind of a guide. Now I'm going to come back in with the real red. Again, you could do this very light and then come back and make darker spots. And I really worked that other one, coming back in and making sure that if you have a sharp pencil, you can really do those edges dark. I did the middle really dark. And you could use your gray here as well to really add in a shadow, or help you add in a shadow. It makes that red really dark. So I just keep working that until I get it how I like it. Now I waited until I assembled it to put the white ink on to this, so that's what I'm going to do on this one too. And this is not dry yet, so just know if you touch this with your fingers, it will come off on your hands, which if you've noticed I have white on my hands. That's why. I'm going to take this away for a minute. Now this is my designer series paper that I'm using. It is from the Perfectly Penciled pack, and it has lots of great patterns. So this is in our annual catalog, and it has stripes, and the other side has flowers. There's lots of different patterns in here. There's polka dots. It's all black and white paper. So I love this too. This would be great. If you don't want to use pencils, I use pencils just because that's what I used on my truck. I'll show you a piece I used blends on. And if you have blending brushes, you could also use that. So this is a wonderful paper pack. You can use it for all different types of cards. So I'm going to use my two pencils, my Bermuda Bay and Coastal Cabana, to color. I tried it with the blends, and I just didn't like this colored with my truck and pencil. So when I do my truck and my blends, which the blends are Pool Party and Bermuda Bay, we don't have a Coastal Cabana, I will use this piece that I did. So I like to do different do the same card but color it different ways. So I will be doing a version with blends. So I will save that piece for when I do the blends. So for this striped piece, it's black and white, and I want to add some color. So I'm coming in with my Bermuda Bay, and I'm pretty used to coloring with these, but I still do it. Make sure that you're not paying attention to this tip, because this color is not darker. So I'm going to come in and I'm just adding in some dark spots. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm scribbling. We're allowed to do that. So you can add darker depending on the pressure you use. This is a little more than I did on the original, and that's okay. I like to test out different things. Now I'm coming in with that Coastal Cabana, and everywhere that there's white, I'm adding it. I'm doing kind of a circular motion. You can just do lines. but I think I like how this looks because it is called perfectly penciled. And so I like that these lines are not uniform. They have a lot of texture to them. And I think the pencil, oops, I keep getting stuck here. The pencil gives that same texture. Now you could add water to this, like I said, not very damp. So a damp, but just barely damp brush, and you could activate this pencil. And smooth it out. But I like the look of this because I didn't activate the pencil on my truck, so this copies that texture. So if you don't have the old truck stamp, we do have a smaller truck stamp that was in another set. So see, this is a little darker than I didn't press very hard when I did this one. You can go different directions. I'm just trying to fill that in. So depending on how hard you push is how dark your color ends up being. So this piece was 3 inches. I like to cut my paper at increments that go into 12 so I can use the most get the most out of my sheet of paper. So these strips were cut at 3 inches, and then I cut it at 3.5. So it's 3 by 3.5 to go onto my front here. So we're going to start building our card, and I'm going to continue to let that dry. So I have this scored, and then I'm going to use my bone folder just to crisp up that edge. So we're starting to get our card together here. I have a strip of basic white. When we cut our paper down, we end up with tons of paper scraps that are either 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch wide. So I am using one of those scraps. I have it cut to 3.5, I believe. You can just grab one of your strips and use it anything that length that'll fit your greeting. I have an inside piece of basic white that is 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches. That's my typical stamping layer. So I like to pre-cut a bunch and have them on hand, and then I can use them on the front of my card and on the inside of my card. This size allows you to have a little bit more of that cardstock showing. So if you want less of a border, you would just cut it at 5 1/4 by 4. So either one of those measurements work. I'm going to stamp on the inside with the tree from that Christmas barn. So I'm going to grab that out, and we're going to go ahead and stamp that, and I'm going to continue to let this dry over here. Because these are photopolymer, you will need a Stampin' Pierce mat. You can also use the one that's in your Stamparatus. So I'm stamping this with a block. I'm using the Stamparatus for my words. Somewhere I have a block here. I'm just using my words on the Stamparatus, but you could use the Stamparatus for this as well. Actually, let me show you how to do that. And then you can stamp everything at one time. Let me show you how you can cut out a step here. I was designing my card, and so now that I know how I want it, here's the side of the plate with my inside greeting. Let me move this out of the way before I get white ink all over me. So we're going to still need that white ink, so I don't want it to go too far. Push this off to the side here. So this is my Stamparatus. I do have my mat in here because this is photopolymer, and this is what I want to stamp on the inside. You will want to use your magnets with this because the photopolymer stamps are very sticky. But I can just stick this right in here. So here's my original. And I stamped it twice. I'm going to show you how I'm going to move my cardstock here and get that same effect. So I'm going to pick that up. I already have my words in place. And I have this right into the corner. And this grid paper you can also purchase separate, or we have an upgraded mat that you can get that you can wipe clean. I'm not good with things I have to wipe off because I tend to forget and I smear it. So I do like the paper grid paper for myself, just so I can stamp my words and make sure everything's straight. And it keeps my foam pad clean. So I'm going to ink this up with basic gray. And we're just going to, now if you wanted these different colors, you could ink them up differently or put them on, you know, different sides. But I'm doing everything in basic gray. And one of the biggest benefits of this is if you didn't get a perfect stamp or you want your words darker, especially with photopolymers, these are new, so sometimes they can have a little bit of residue on there. You just ink and stamp again. And that part that didn't stamp, that still had ink on it, I'm just pressing down a little bit harder to get it to show up. So there we have that. Now I am going to clean this one because I don't want it, when I move my paper, I don't want it to stamp again. So I'm just using that chamois. And you could remove this if you wanted. I'm going to use, I'm just going to kind of blot this dry. I don't want that to have anything on it that's going to mark my paper. So I'm just using my paper towel and making sure that's dry. And I'm going to take this paper, I'm going to scoot it over. Looks like I went one line. There we go. So if you wanted it lower, you could move this down and then move your paper accordingly. Just remember, you want to have your magnet there, because now I'm definitely moving it away from the corner. So I want to make sure I have my magnet on there so this does not move. I'm going to ink up my tree. And stamp. And that's good. So our plates are removable. My piece for my little strip is on this side of the plate. So I'm going to turn it over and take this out. It's ready to go. And I'm just going to shove my strip right there in the corner. Now it is a little harder to stamp right in the corner, and because my strip is the exact size I need, I can't put my magnet on it because it's exactly the size of my greeting. So if you want to be able to put your magnet on it, you'll need to leave it a little bit longer so you can put your magnet down here. I'm just going to stick my magnet right here to try to keep it from going anywhere. So it's just up against my paper. It's not actually on it. And then I'm going to ink this in the basic gray. And I'm trying to do it well because I don't want to have to stamp this one again since I forgot and cut my paper a little short. So I'm going to stamp that, and I want to make sure this side gets stamped well, because I'm right here in the corner, and because of this hinge, it makes it a little harder to get a good impression right there. Turned out perfect. So just take your time, don't rush, and there's our strip. Okay, so let's see if our white ink is ready to go here. Pull this back in, and it's still really wet, so we can start assembling some of our pieces, but that needs to dry a little bit more. I think all the parts on all these other little parts that I added onto the truck are pretty much dry. It's just down here where I really layered it to cover up that grass. I'm going to go ahead and hit it with my heat tool. So forewarning, it's going to get a little loud for a second while this is running. So if you don't like that, make sure you turn the volume down while I do this. Okay, that's good enough for us to glue it. And I'm going to show you when we do, on this one, we're going to do the splatter technique that I want to share with you. And I wanted to have one splattered and one not, just so that you could see the difference. I will tell you, we have a new product that is kind of a returning product. I've used it a few years ago when we had it, that you can use in place of this white ink, but it puffs up. And that is called the Snowfall Accents Puff Paint. This will be available in the July to December 2022 mini catalog that starts July 1st. And when you add this on to this, and you do have to be careful, it will react to some of your inks. You can add this on top and heat it with your heat tool, and it will puff up and look like piles of snow. And you can add, you can do that and add in layer upon layer and keep heating it, and it'll just keep puffing out, and it grows. So a little bit goes a long way. It's really fun to play with. But today we're just using the plain old white craft ink, which I like too. So it depends on what kind of textures you like on your card. Okay, now we are going to start assembling. I'm going to do the inside first. And you could add color to this if you wanted to. Get your one of your green pencils out and add in some color here. You certainly could do that. I am just going to go with it as is. And even if you adhere this down and you change your mind, you can always open your card and just add the color. I do that sometimes. I make a card one way and then I change my mind. So this card I'm making in landscape. You could make it as a portrait card as well. Just remember when you're stamping your layers, if you want your card to go this way, it's going to be a little bit different. And how this, you may want to make this longer and how it looks. But I do love this layout where we have a little DSP on the side and then something over here. I just like this better in the landscape. I liked a little more separation with my layers and more of that red showing through. Now these I'm just adhering flat, and then I'm going to use dimensionals on these two pieces. So if you don't have dimensionals or you don't like that dimension, you can leave those off and glue everything flat. I will say, if you're mailing things and you use lots and lots of dimension here in the US, that can add to your postage costs. So that's something to think about. I'm just trying to make it sure it's straight with this side. And then I'm going to adhere this down, and I want this to be more towards that right edge. And this is why you want your ink dry, because as you touch this and you're trying to adhere things down, you will end up with white ink on your fingers. So I'm just lining this up with this edge. I'm just holding it in place for a second. I've heated this and colored on it and really worked on this basic white paper. So I want to make sure that it adheres well. So I'm just holding it down for a second. Now, my other pieces, I'm using dimensionals. So let me grab some of those out. I have the mini dimensionals and the regular sized. So I'm going to use 3 on this. And I'm going to use 2 minis on this. You could also adhere this flat. If you don't like the wreath popping up, feel free to adjust and change to the supplies you have and what your preference is. Just taking my backings off here. So I'm putting my wreath on first just so I can make sure that my greeting's not going to get in the way. I personally liked it here, but my son informed me that it didn't look good on the door. So my original card, I wanted my wreath here. And he said, no, Mom, that doesn't look right. So I'm putting it over here. Like we've hung it on the hood here. That's why I said even though I colored all those little bits and areas perfect and how I wanted it, it's okay because I may have decided not to use the wreath. So I go ahead and do that anyways. And then I'm just adding this in down here. Trying to line it up with the bottom of that. These lines are not straight. So a lot of times I look at my patterned paper and I tend to confuse myself or get myself crooked. I'm trying to use this rectangle as my guide for that. So there we have our card, a beautiful Christmas card using some non-Christmassy things, as well as an old favorite and a new favorite. Now we're going to do this technique where we splatter. So I'm going to move this card because I don't want it to splatter. I'm going to put my pencils away. And we've altered our designer series paper. We've had a lot of fun on this card, just trying out different things and doing different things. So I'm going to splatter. Let me bring in this scrap paper because we do not want to get this. It will still get everywhere, but I don't want it on my surface where I'm making my card. And I'm going to bring in that block and my water painter, and I'm going to thin out that ink. I'm going to add a couple drops of water to it. I want this to be really thin. And I'm going to load up my brush. And you can do this 2 different ways. You can tap on your lid, or you can flick. You get a little bit more with the flicking. And you can do as much as you want. Looks like it's snowing on your truck. You can pick up more, add more. More down here. So you can do it as heavy as you want. And it will activate that pencil. So if you color with blends, it might soak into your paper a little bit, but it is going to remain very white. It's not going to react with the ink. This, you'll notice, as it dries and gets into your paper, it may react a little bit with the colors that you've put down. If you want it to be a little thicker, you can add a little bit more ink in and then flick, and it will be a little bit thicker. I'm going to take some of this ink, and I've got some off to the side here, and I'm just going to dot some onto my wreath. And it's going to react with those colors. So as long as you know that while you're doing it, you can take your time. So you're not smearing it. And just add a little bit of snow onto your wreath. Now you're going to want to let this dry because it's going to be wet for a little bit. So when I do this technique, I like to just have a little spot on my table where I'm setting my cards off to the side and letting this white ink dry. And then as it's getting close to being drier, you can always use your heat tool and speed up that process. So there is a Christmas card idea or a holiday card. You certainly could stamp this with season's greetings or whatever holiday you celebrate in the winter. It could become a birthday card or anything, a thank you card, anything that you want to be have a winter theme. So there's the splatter. And you definitely want to let it dry. And if you colored this whole background, if you had sponged on the color or something, or used your pencils, as it lands on that background, it looks like snow. And like I said, when you're flicking it, it goes everywhere. So you want to have a little scrap sheets so that you're not getting that ink on your space, because it will get on everything else. It does not dry quickly. Okay, there we have it. There is our 2 cards, my original card with no splatter, and the watercolor pencils with that Country Living truck. And then here's the one with the splatter. I hope you've enjoyed this card. If you did, please feel free to leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel so that you'll know when I post new videos. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you soon. Take care.